This happened 2 summers ago, while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple that I had met at a conference for work. It seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted a vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but they didn't want to board their cats, and I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, where they happened to live, because I had loved it the first time that I went there. And we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out and house sat for them. So I flew out there and they showed me around for a few days. Taught me how to care for the cats, 2 of them. One that was extremely shy and that I barely saw, which is important later. And their plans. They gave me access to their house and cars. These people were pretty generous. And before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and I was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays into San Fran, Sonoma, and Monterey. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the pass surrounding nearby Mount Diablo. And I was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there, even. But then one day, about halfway through my final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't be going inside. I shook it off and I went inside anyway. It was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I made some food for myself and went to bed. And I was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time that I had even seen her close up. The entire time that I had been there up to that point, she never left my host's bedroom, unless she didn't realize that I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird, and just assumed that she decided that I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that about halfway through that night, I thought that I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside of my window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and I went back to sleep. The day after in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but I kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way that I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower second lock, and that's the only lock that my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So, I had to call my host and find the hideaway key, which, to their credit, safely wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside, and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that and went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did it, but with a different door. This time, I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty bewildered. My own cats are pretty whack, but I think in my mind that I was trying to come up with a way that the cats could be locking me out of the house, but I kept coming up empty. I decided that I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked, and I just wrote it off and started checking and triple checking locks when I went out of the house or out into the garage. That night when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me, but also wouldn't leave the room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful, nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyways. But as the day went on, I started to get that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into a feeling of being incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach. And as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening." And I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and that poor cashier, because I just had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got to my car, I was still crying and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I couldn't not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself after about half an hour to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought that I would get over it and be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I would get a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house saying that I had already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone in the house leave. So I faced the inside of the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and I did just that. The second that I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in my host's room turned on and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house and they didn't find anyone. But the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open, so I'm glad the cats didn't get out. And there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was in an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. Also, the minute that the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there. There were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my host immediately to verify if anything had been taken, which once they were back, they verified that nothing had been taken. So they said that they would patrol for a bit but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home at the end of the trip. So, basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers, and leading her to choose the one that was at least a little less strange, being me. This all messed me up pretty badly, especially because they didn't catch the person, and didn't seem to have any desire to look. And I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Luckily, nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel anything off the rest of the time that I was there. But by then, the damage had already been done. I've never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since then. But I am extremely glad that my gut spoke up. I guess I would rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. Alright, so this is something that I've been wanting to post here for a while, but I've just been too lazy. But alas, I'm stuck in a bus again with 40 minutes of time to kill and no music on my new phone. This happened to me this June. Our school exams start around June 20th every year, and well, I choose not to do math the entire year and study hardcore the last month. Our school is a private school that I can't afford without a scholarship, so I have to have good results in those exams. So I got a tutor, who's also my best friend's mom. I spent almost every day at their place, which is on the other side of our small city. I live in Armenia, for context, and we're a poor second world country, so our public transport kind of stinks. And taxis are expensive. Minimum from our place to theirs is about 1,000 drams, which is $2 but is more like 15 to us. So I have to take crappy minibuses for 40 minutes every time I go there and come back. Now until then, my experience with public transport was pretty mild. I'm a girl, which if you're not an ogre, results in at least a small amount of unnecessary attention, but you get used to it after a while. Nothing too worrying. I get hit on once or twice and stared at a lot, but it doesn't really bother me. I get away most of the time because of my resting face. I look like the most unapproachable person on earth, let alone the bus or the station. So when this happened, I was beyond shook. That particular day, I had to stay longer than usual. It was 4 days before the exam and I was extra panicky. Also should note that I looked like absolute crap. My hair was greasy in a bun and I was wearing a huge hoodie and sweatpants. Not saying that's a horrible look for everyone, but me in particular. I looked like a potato sack with a head, and an onion on said head as hair. So I got out around 8:30, and it was already getting dark. When I got on the bus, it was fully dark and the bus was almost entirely empty. Now, to explain this property, you need to imagine the bus that I was in and how these seats are positioned. I was sitting on the first seat next to the window, the left one, and as I said, I was the first passenger here. So, 2 stops later, 3 men got on the bus. This dude, who had the full ability to sit anywhere that he wanted, sat next to me. I really didn't give him much thought because A, it's the first row seat. Maybe he just sat where he could. The other 2 dudes sat in the front next to the driver's seat. We drive for another 2 stops and a girl gets on. He gets up and moves to the seat behind us, and this girl sits next to me. He started talking to her and she still seemed quite uncomfortable, although giggled along. On the next stop, he moved to the singular seat next to the right window. Now, this is where the first red flags come in. He turns to her side, full body, and continues talking to her like, "Pretty girl, when you getting off here? Maybe with me?" And she's saying no and giggling uncomfortably. At this point, the driver himself is side-eyeing this dude. A stop later, she gets up to pay and he touches her thigh. She turns around and yells at him to stop. The driver turns around and calls him out, tells him to sit back and not move until he gets off this bus. Kudos to the driver, honestly. Stuff like this is common bus culture. Happened a couple of times to me and nobody ever said anything. Regardless, she practically jumps off the bus and speed walks away. My heart is racing at this point. I knew it would have been noble of me to protect her, but I honestly couldn't. I was scared of the dude and I wouldn't have stopped him. It's at 9:45 by now and these streets are emptying. I had my headphones in, but I turned the music off because, gosh, I'm scared of this dude and I'm alone with him, with no one but an old man, the driver, and one of the dudes from earlier who is fast asleep. And that's when he turns to me. "How old are you even?" I didn't answer and pretended that I didn't hear him. He didn't ask again. I was facing away from him, looking out the window. Instead, I felt the flash of his camera. I turned around and he was holding his phone at me. He was grinning and looking at me as if his friend, whom he just pranked or something. I didn't say anything and I continued to look out the window. At this point, I was full-on panicking. I opened my bag as casually as I could and mentally screamed to myself. I had left my pocket knife in my friend's earlier that week and kept forgetting to take it back. So I took my pencil out, one of the mechanical ones with a metal nib, and quickly put it in my pocket. And then another flash came, this time with the camera click too. I literally dialed 911 and sat there. I didn't call it, I just put the number in case, and I texted my friend. And then he was typing something. We got to my stop and I didn't ask for the bus to stop until we were right at it. The second that it was about to pass my stop, I basically screamed at the driver to slow down. He quickly stopped and I got off really fast. He didn't have enough time to get off after me as the driver drove off as soon as I had left, probably because he had realized what was happening and didn't want him to follow me. I still don't understand why anyone would need a picture of me. I don't even want to, especially not then, like that. A couple of days later, when I was at that bus stop, now heading from my place to my friend's place, I saw that guy again. He tried to talk to me, asked me how old I was again. I promptly told him that it's none of his business and I walked away. He tried to follow me, but I went into the local pet shop. I know the owner after 6 years of being their regular, and she told him to, more or less strongly, screw off. I never saw him again. My friend has this story that she tells sometimes because of how insane it is. I asked her if it was cool to share it with all of you, and she was game for it. Basically, there was this kid on the bus who sat in front of me. We didn't have assigned seats, but everyone kind of sat in the same place every day. He was obviously kind of an outcast. He was overweight and he smelled a little funny, and he didn't talk to people, wore glasses, all those things. There was a jerk on the bus who liked to make fun of him. One day, I had enough and I told the jerk to stop. After that, me and the kid started to talk a little bit. I tried to be nice, because he obviously didn't get a lot of interaction. But things quickly turned weird. He told me that he was a vampire, straight up. He gave me this whole story about this girl who was also a vampire that he knew. How she turned him, or how she had come into his room last night, starving, and she had fed on him. It was pretty weird, so I just tried to be like, yeah, okay. He told me that people had to carry a certain gene in order to be turned into a vampire, and that he could tell if it was someone had it by their smell. Of course I had it. Things got really weird when he started talking like a bad romance novel. Things like, I can't afford to have weaknesses, but I can't help caring about someone, and weird crap like that. It was pretty obvious what he was getting at, but I wasn't used to flirting, let alone whatever that was. So I just kind of sat and listened and tried not to make direct eye contact with the kid. But by far the weirdest thing was one of the last things that he said to me. He was telling me that everyone's blood has a distinct scent, and without prompting, he informed me, yours smells like chocolate chip cookies. So, chocolate chip pickup vampire. I'm not sitting next to you again.